Welcome back, guys. Now, today I ask, what if your brain isn't creating your consciousness? What if everything science has told us about the mind, every textbook, every study, every confident declaration, is built on an assumption that was never proven? What if the most respected neuroscientists alive just stood in front of his peers and said exactly that? And when you hear what he said and what the ancients knew thousands of years before he said it, you are going to look at your own awareness very differently. Now, stay with me, this one's important. Now, in 1998, a neuroscientist named Christoph Koch made a very public bet. Koch wasn't some fringe researcher. He worked at MIT and Caltech and later became a leading figure at the Allen Institute for Brain Science. He dedicated his entire career to one question: how does the brain produce consciousness? And in 1998, he was so confident scientists were close to answering it that he bet a philosopher named David Chalmers that research would identify exactly how the brain produces consciousness by 2023. 25 years. The best labs in the world, billions in research funding, and in 2023, both scientists publicly agreed the answer had not been found and declared that Chalmers the winner. Coke lost the bet. And what happened next is the part that nobody is talking about. Because losing the bet didn't just mean science needed more time, it started to mean something far more radical. It started to mean that the whole framework might be wrong. Now, here's what scientists can do: they can map every neuron in your brain, they can watch it light up in real time, and they can identify which regions activate when you feel fear, love, or pain. But here's what they cannot do, and they never have been able to do. They cannot explain how subjective experiences arise from physical brain activity at all. This is what philosophers and scientists call the hard problem of consciousness. Think about what that means for a second. Science can tell you which neurons fire when you see the color red. It cannot tell you why you experience redness, why it feels like something, why there is an inner life at all. We are not talking about a gap in knowledge. We are talking about a gap in the entire model. In April 2026, Christoph Koch presented at a major neuroscience symposium and said out loud what a growing number of researchers have been quietly thinking. The brain may not be creating consciousness at all. Consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality itself. So, what does that actually mean? Well, Koch points to three areas where the current model breaks it down. First, consciousness experience cannot be fully reduced to physical brain mechanism. Second, modern physics itself raises serious questions about what can even be considered real or not. And third, there are persistent unexplained phenomena like near death experiences, mystical states, and terminal lucidity that simply do not fit existing scientific framework. Terminal lucidity, by the way, is when someone with severe brain damage or advanced dementia suddenly becomes completely clear and present, sometimes in the hours before they die. People who haven't recognized their families in years suddenly know exactly who is in the room. If the brain creates consciousness, that should be impossible. A damaged brain should produce damaged consciousness. But that is not always what happens. Koch's response to all of this is to revisit ideas that mainstream science dismissed for over a century. He is pointing towards panpsychism and idealism, philosophical frameworks that treat consciousness not as something the brain generates, but as something fundamental to the fabric of reality. He supports something called integrated information theory, the idea that the system with a sufficiently high level of integrated information has some form of subjective experience. In other words, awareness may not begin and end with the human brain. Now, here's where it gets sacred, because none of this is new. The roots of panpsychism go all the way back to ancient Greek philosophers. Thales declared that everything is full of gods. Anaxagoras introduced the concept of Nu, a cosmic mind that orders and animates the universe. Plato and Aristotle held panpsychist beliefs, as did Stoics. In Hinduism and Buddhism, consciousness or awareness has always been understood as a fundamental aspect of reality, present not just in humans, but throughout existence. In indigenous traditions across every continent, the living intelligence of the universe, in the land, the water, the sky, was not a metaphor. It was understood as a literal truth. In Renaissance, Giordano Bruno embraced the idea of a living universe where every part of existence was interconnected and brimming with life. The church found his ideas so threatening that they burned him at the stake. And in the 19th century, Gustav Fechner proposed that the earth itself was a living organism with its own form of consciousness. These weren't primitive ideas waiting for science to correct them. They were advanced frameworks for understanding reality and the scientific revolution, deliberately set aside because they didn't fit a model that was built on measurable physical matter. And now, in 2026, a former MIT professor is standing at a symposium saying maybe those ancient traditions were pointing out something very real. And so, this is exactly why C3 Media exists, because I believe that consciousness is collectively co created. The framework this channel is built on is the idea that consciousness is not a product of biology. It is a ground of reality that biology participates in. When we talk about sacred geometry, frequency, the divine feminine, the living intelligence encoded in the ancient sites and the ancient symbols, we are not being poetic. We are pointing at the same thing that Christoph Koch is now being forced to point at from other directions. The mystics arrived there through direct experience. Science is arriving there through the failure of every other explanation. And both roads lead to the same place. And what that means for you right now is that the awareness you are experiencing in this moment is not a byproduct of neurons firing in a 3-pound organ in your skull. It may be something far older, far larger, and far more fundamental than that. You are not a brain having an experience. You may be consciousness itself having a human experience. So here's the closing, right? Science just cracked the door open on what the ancients built entire civilizations around. We are going to keep walking through that door, one video at a time. I'm Erica. This is C3 Media 888. The world and life is vast, so we will never stop wandering. If this resonated, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. I want to know, do you believe consciousness lives outside the brain? See you in the comments.